it's okay to fluctuate, and it will fluctuate. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, and how do you handle that? And then what things can you control, such as, your attire, etc., that would help you be the most authentic version of yourself.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Artists of Data Science podcast, the only self-development podcast for data scientists. You're going to learn from and be inspired by the people, ideas, and conversations that'll encourage creativity and innovation in yourself so that you can do the same for others. I also host open office hours. You can register to attend by going to bit.ly/ADSOH. I look forward to seeing you all there. Let's ride this beat out into another awesome episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star review. Our guest today is the Vice President of Client Services at Darwin Research Group, where she gets to work with a team of superhuman data scientists to provide advanced intelligence and in-depth strategic insights to healthcare executives. More interestingly, though, she's a gelotologist who specializes in studying the correlation between humor and intelligence. Her interest in humor and laughter was sparked during a night off from working on her dissertation, where she took a break and visited a comedy club. It was a detour that changed the course of her life and shook her worldview. And she's since been fascinated with the traits and facts about humor and its effects on both the audience and comedians. Today, she's here to talk to us about the art form of stand-up comedy and what it could teach us about courage, intelligence, and authenticity. So please help me in welcoming our guest today, host of the Leader Voices podcast, Dr. Sadhna Bokhiria. Dr. Bokhiria, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be on the show today. I appreciate you swinging by.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate it. It sounds like a very fancy introduction.
Well, most definitely is. You're a very fancy individual. You've done some awesome research. I had a great time digging into your work and what you're about. And I'm super excited to talk to you about the stuff you know so well, because I think my audience will benefit greatly from it. But before we get into all of that, talk to us about where you grew up and what was it like there?
Sure. So I'm in Vegas right now. That's why you see the giant Trump building behind me. I don't know how well you can see it. They told me that they upgraded my room, and I was like, oh, okay, great. And I think the actual only difference between my other room and this room is the view. So I'm not sure how much of an upgrade it was, but it was just really funny when I checked in and I saw that. So I grew up in Connecticut. I was born in Hounslow in London. And I grew up in Connecticut. We're pretty much the only Indian people at the town where I'm from, which is called Waterford, Connecticut. And it was kind of interesting. And I think one of the reasons why I became very fascinated with comedians is because they're kind of like the outliers, one group of outliers in our communities. But where I grew up, so I'm what we call Mare. And so we're a very remote group of Indians from Gujarat in India. And to kind of frame it, if we broke it down by population, we make up 1/1000th of the world population. So most likely in the future, mathematically, they guesstimate that we essentially won't exist anymore. We're descendants of 14 specific bloodlines. And so my community is very much obsessed, understandably, with kind of keeping our culture and keeping our bloodlines going. But we migrated to the United States. And what was interesting is you have this kind of extreme fear and tension in that the first generation children will become too Americanized. It's a very common theme that I'm sure you're familiar with as an Indian yourself. So it was interesting for me because I always felt like I didn't quite fit in or belong. So in Connecticut, all the American people would see me as, a non-Caucasian or like a brown person. But within my family, it was like, don't spend time with American people. You're going to become too American. Or if I did anything American at all, it was like, you're too American, you're too American. Later, I went to boarding school in Panchgani, which is in South India. And immediately, I thought I would fit in there as an Indian, but no way. It was very much, you are American. So in India, I'm too American. And in the US, it's like I'm too Indian, but not Indian enough within my own Mer community. So it's been very interesting because it's that dichotomy of identity. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm really, really interested in the way in which identity development occurs and how environment, clothing, the people you're around, everything impacts the way in which you identify yourself and your authenticity.
That is super, super interesting. I definitely can relate to everything you're saying about not really fitting in, in America, and then trying to hang out with people from India or people who are quote unquote more Indian than me, not being accepted by them. And this whole thing about identity, like I'm born and raised in California. I stayed in California until I was like, 28-ish, and left, a while ago, several years ago. I very strongly identify myself not as Punjabi, not as American, just Californian. Like I take pride in that identity. So that's really interesting to hear about that. So,
yeah, that's neat. It's neat. So why Californian?
I don't know, man. I feel like it's so distinct from the rest of the U.S. We have kind of our own slang. It's got
Cool,
it creates
too.
culture for the world, right? So I just feel very proud of that.
Yeah, that's great. It's also cool. Like there's a cool association with beach. You're like a surfer dude. I'll totally stereotype you.
Yeah.
And it's all positive stereotypes. You're by the beach, just kind of
Yeah.
taking
Even
it
though
in.
don't even know how to swim. If you put me on a surfboard, I probably drown.
Yeah, I don't know what I would say if someone, like I find it difficult, how do I identify myself? I would say I'm a rebel. I definitely want to be remembered as someone who's cool. Like when I picture like my funeral, I feel like, people would be like, oh, she was so smart, she was so nice. But everyone says that at a funeral, right? Like it's like a given. Even if they don't know me, they're most likely going to say that I was like really nice. But like if people who know me are there, they're going to be like, she was a cool girl. Like she was just cool.
Nice.
That's what I want.
So speaking of being a rebel, like what kind of kid were you in high school? And then when you were in high school, what did you think your future would look like?
Sure. So in high school, I was definitely very much a dork. I love reading. It's something that is a great pleasure in my life. I'm relatively, I'd say, addicted to reading. I read at least one book a week. I was an English major. I had lunch with my English teacher pretty much every day. And I also hung out with all boys. So like I was like a tomboy, I'd say. My dad really wanted a boy. So he basically raised me as a boy. So I was really into like dirt bikes, motorcycles, anything with two wheels is better than four and one wheel is better than two was kind of like our saying. But I really was very much a rebel. I had 4 motorcycles and I just kept getting more and more. And now as an adult, I think, oh my gosh, my parents were horrible parents for letting me do these near death activities, like being on a bike. But for the most part in high school, I mean, I was an avid reader and I just was really into, motorcycles and quads, as strange as that sounds, and dirt bikes.
Yeah, you're definitely cool.
Thank you.
So what was the journey like after high school that brought you to where you are today? So, you kind of deviated from the path that most Indian parents set for their kids, lawyer, doctor, engineer, and you studied something completely different.
Yeah, so I always wanted to be a professor. So I read Hamlet in 11th grade, and it definitely was a defining factor in my life. It really impacted me. And I said, I want to teach Shakespeare. And so at first, of course, being Indian, I talked to my family and they were like, you can't be a high school teacher. They don't make any money. Like that's failure. And so I thought, it's a little bit more prestigious if I kind of went for a doctorate and focused on that instead and became a professor. And so I kind of had like this very linear concept of what I thought would be like a happily ever after career trajectory. I thought I'd become an adjunct, then I'd become full-time, then I'd get tenure, become a full professor, and, live happily ever after, publish some work. And what happened was I moved to Boston. I was teaching at a couple of the universities there, and it wasn't until I got promoted to the director of the English department where I realized that I absolutely have no desire to evaluate my peers. I hated like the management administrative part of it. And so it was really like a blessing because I got promoted at a very young age, and I, in a sense, achieved what I thought was my dream, which was to become a professor. And then as soon as I started really doing anything that kept me away or moved me away from the actual teaching part. So my goal was to go in, teach my classes, and leave. And so anything that kind of wasn't that, it wasn't my thing. So I stopped and I just kept teaching the classes as an adjunct. And then I kind of moved into more passion projects, et cetera, things that really bring me joy, such as like my comedy research. And I did a lot of work in the nonprofit world as well.
So talk to us about that. What happened at that comedy club? Like, what was it about that experience that really changed you and changed kind of the path of research you're doing? I think you took on additional research, or you completely changed your research path after that?
Yes. So interestingly enough, as I was saying earlier, so I'm really interested in this kind of immigrant experience for Asian immigrants, especially like Indians. So I wrote my dissertation on mares, which is, like I was telling you, the type of Indian I am. And so I wanted to understand the way in which female mares in particular navigate their surroundings. So I did my research in India, Canada, the United States, and the UK. And what I did is I wanted to understand the psychosocial impact of essentially, if you take a mare woman who lives in India and you take a mare woman who lives in the West, how is that experience different? And what are essentially the pros and cons? I could guess that the pro to being in the West is you have better access to education and you have better access to job opportunities and essentially equality as like a woman. So Indian women who are educated in the West, my research shows that even though they have better access to education and better access to economic opportunity, in the mare community, the women are encouraged to get married. That is the focus. First and foremost, you get married. Education is later for these women. And because they have that dichotomy of two opposing cultures in a sense, right? You have individualistic culture in the West and collectivist culture in the East. And so the Indian women who are getting educated in the West had a huge disadvantage in that they really were not taking advantage a lot of all these opportunities. Whereas the Indian women in India, they're being encouraged to go to school and they're surrounded with Mare or Gujarati culture. So they don't have that added pressure or that psychosocial burden. So they don't have as much of like the trauma and like the drama of being Indian and trying to figure out who the hell you are, right? So they're at a huge advantage in terms of everything, opportunity, etc. So I'm writing my dissertation on this, right? And I was traveling to all these different places. And it was fascinating. It was lovely. It was wonderful. But I was a hermit. All I did was wake up, sit in front of my computer, I never left. I was quarantined before the pandemic, self-quarantined trying to do this. And as an Indian woman, I have a mustache. I have, thick eyebrows. So they're growing and I'm looking horrible. And my neighbor, he just knocks on my door and he's like, "You look terrible. Like, what the hell is happening to you?" And I'm like, I'm working on this research. And he takes me to a comedy show. Go to the comedy show, laugh so hard, and just felt so alive, more alive than I felt, despite the fact I was really passionate about my research. The next day, I still felt like lighter, like I could breathe easier. I don't know. It's like I just felt more grounded as like a human being and more like myself. Strangest thing. So I kind of pushed my dissertation aside and I started just side researching laughter and comedy and I was very much working in an oncology space at the same time. So it fit right in. So I started my research with the way in which laughter impacts people in the audience, the people who are laughing like I was. And then it shifted where I started directing my attention to the actual stand-up comedians. Because I thought to myself, if the people in the audience are, having these incredible health benefits, it boosts their immunity, it boosts their ability, it decreases the chance of heart attack, and it increases oxygen and reduces stress, cortisol, all these things. And even in cancer patients, I was reading all these incredible stories and meeting these people and really seeing a difference in the way in which they were able to handle chemotherapy, because they made laughter part of their life. So it was quite moving and remarkable. And then I said, okay, well, if the comedians are living, eating, breathing in this space, it's got to impact them as well. And so that's how I kind of gave you the longest answer in the world to a question I don't even remember.
No, that's awesome. I really, really appreciate that depth. That was really fascinating to hear about your research and just the effect that laughter has on your body. That is really, really interesting. That has all these positive benefits. Doesn't matter if we like, ha ha ha, fake laugh, or do we like need like a genuine laugh to get some of these positive benefits?
Yes. So genuine laughter is definitely the best in terms of your wellness, because, it feels great, but your body really doesn't know the difference. So even fake laughter has positive benefits for your body. So even fake smiling, is good for you.
So I'd love to get into learning more about what you learned from the stand-up comedian. So one of my best friends is a stand-up comic. He actually lives in Vegas as well. And he's probably going to really appreciate this question about the relationship between humor and intelligence. So what is the relationship between these two things?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating thing. I mean, comedians have higher IQs, higher emotional intelligence, higher verbal reasoning. They're better at problem-solving skills. They're better at abstract thinking, or the ability to think outside the box. They're fun to be around. People tend to find them to be more attractive. And I mean, the relationship is, I think it's multifaceted, but there's a certain level of courage, right, that it takes to get up and put yourself out there and be vulnerable and to be on stage and to take a chance with what you think is funny, something that you wrote. So I think that there's different aspects to it, right? So one aspect is having the courage to show up and to bet on yourself and to say, look, I'm going to do this. And what's the worst that's going to happen, right? I think people admire that. And I think people find something remarkable in that person who's not afraid to kind of take a chance and bet on themselves. And I think that for me, that was definitely one of the big things where it was like, it's amazing to me that someone could just have that level of confidence and courage. And so that's part of it. But then the other part of it is like the prep. So before you go on stage, it's like they're constantly aware. They're constantly scanning the environment for material. So a comedian's brain, it's never really, really off. There's that constant kind of like, is this something? Is this funny? And I think finding the humor in the mundane, finding the absurdity in everything. If you look for it, you'll see it. It's everywhere. And it's funny because you don't take yourself as seriously. And I think maybe you're a little bit more present.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciated that answer. And I'm sure my buddy, DJ Sandu is his name, I'm sure he'll appreciate that as well.
Oh, I think I know your friend. He was at the World Series of Comedy this weekend.
Yeah. DJ Sandu, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Oh, nice. All right, yeah, it's like one of my best friends. I've known him forever. Yeah, that was definitely him then. So yeah, DJ Sandu, like giant freaking beard, right? Was that the same guy I saw? Yep.
I saw his photo all over everything. And one of my good friends, his name's Rick Bonson. He was saying, he's a really great guy. Like, he's a good guy. He was like showing me his picture on the billboard. He's like, he's a really good guy. And him and one other person was essentially if I understand correctly, like the main people who put on the show. That was that.
That's
cool. Why I came here, which is kind of ironic.
That's so cool. Small world, huh?
Very.
So, all right. So comedians are smart. They have to be smart, right, to be that funny. But can people suffer from intelligence?
It's such a interest. I wish I could just write like a gazillion dissertations like that's and just get paid, right? To just explore all these fascinating topics. So can you suffer from intelligence? I think so. Absolutely. We've seen it time and time again throughout history. A lot of great people in all types of art, right? All different types of artists, and this kind of correlation between madness, insanity, and extreme genius or intelligence. And I think that part of it is when you're at that level of intelligence, you find patterns. You see things in a pattern-like way. And it's kind of like the paradox of like living in the box, right? If you live in the box, you don't know any better. Ignorance is bliss. But once you're outside of the box and you can see everything, it's like you never really want to go back inside the box because that's like a lesser state of existence, I think. But there is that kind of notion of the knowledge, the suffering that comes from the knowledge, right? From knowing. And so I think that there is, time and time again, a lot of great examples of suffering from intelligence, which a lot of the comedians I've talked to, the majority of them have had some type of physical or psychological trauma that essentially almost put them into a state of rebellion, a state of, you know what, who cares? I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to do it now. I'm going to bet on myself. So I think that there's a relationship between this certain kind of rebellious way of living and also knowing that life is short, and having that knowledge that, you will die at some point in time. As morbid as that sounds, it kind of pushes you to not take time for granted because you're smart enough to know that you don't have all the time in the world.
No, absolutely love that. Like it sounds morbid, but I do contemplate death like every day, just as part of my philosophy, right?
That's great. There's an app that I really like. It's called We Croak. And what it does is it reminds me 5 times a day. It says, just so you know, you're going to die. And it gives you like this quote. And it's based on Tibetan monks. And what they do is 5 times a day, they contemplate death. They actually contemplate the decaying of their flesh. And it's proven to change your brain structure and to help you really focus on the fact that life is very, nothing is permanent. Life is very fast and short.
Yeah. I mean, Marcus Aurelius has one of my favorite quotes about this. It's, you can leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. And I just think that very powerful, very powerful.
Yeah, it's very, very powerful.
So intelligence is plastic in a sense, right? Like you could develop intelligence, you can cultivate it. Can you do the same for humor? Is humor a skill? Is it just something that we're born with? Can we get better at it?
Yeah, so I think that one of the ways that people can really get better at it is being very cognizant of who you surround yourself with, right? So it's like, I'm very particular about my small circle of friends. They make me feel very comfortable, and like I'm not going to be judged. I'm not going to, if I make a crappy joke or a crappy decision, whatever it is, it's like an abundance of love and acceptance. And I think that it makes it a lot easier for me to be humorous, to be fun. And I think that that's one of the things that as I've gotten older, I've realized if you want to have more humor in your life, you want to be around people who appreciate it and who cultivate it and support you in that. And in turn, it turns into kind of a cycle in that they will also do the same thing and just kind of have more fun in their life. So I think that's a great way of cultivating humor in your life, making sure you're surrounded by people who value it, because it is a value.
So are funny people more emotionally intelligent? And if so, why is that?
I would say they're absolutely more emotionally intelligent. And, I'm making this as like a sweeping generalization, but I would say the majority of comedians, of course, you're going to have some that are not. But you have to be, right? Because you have to, in order for you to get up in front of a room where you have a vast, variety of demographics, you have to be able to kind of tap into the human condition. And it's the same reason why we celebrate Shakespeare and why he's been such a huge part of the Western canon. His writing is about the universal human conditions. And comedians, the best comedians, they do the same thing. They recognize that, hey, this person may be far right, far left, this person may be young, this person may be older. But if I can find one thing that all of these people can't help but relate to, I'm going to connect with them, right? So they're thinking on a wider, like macro level when it comes to what it means to be human in the first place. And then from like a one-on-one setting, it's like, you're training that skill where you can tell if someone's not paying attention to you or not feeling whatever it is that you're saying, and having that kind of self-recognition. It is a skill, and it's a fundamental skill that I think people appreciate because it's easier to connect with people if you're kind of aware of where they are.
Yeah, my next question is going to be, does laughter help us improve our relationships? And it sounds like it definitely does, right?
Yes. So think about a time in your life where, you were with someone and you guys just laughed together, or something humorous happened and you both shared that experience in laughter. It immediately builds trust, and it's kind of like those are the moments that we reflect on and remember in nostalgia, right? Like, remember that time. And I think of a time when you like got into an argument with someone, and then in the middle, like they cracked a smile because they couldn't like stay mad at you. Like it breaks the tension immediately. And then even if you're still kind of, angry in some sense, and it's still kind of boiling, it dissipates it to a certain level just from cracking a smile and being like, really, like, so it's a beautiful coping mechanism that's built into our evolution.
And something that wasn't built into our evolution was just this constant use and communication through screens. And now we're having to do so a lot more because of our global situation. What impact do you think this has on emotional intelligence, having to communicate with people more through screens, especially in the workplace?
Yeah. It's interesting because I do, a lot of Zoom calls. And I think that there's an advantage to it compared to how we were doing conference calls before, where, there wasn't, the video wasn't the norm. Let's say last year at this time, it's like you do conference calls where it wasn't a video emphasis. So I think that there's pros and cons to it in that because the video is replacing your traditional conference call, there's a little bit more of an interaction there. But there's also kind of, the notion of just being desensitized. And I think that's what we have to be cautious of. When you're desensitized and you're getting Zoom fatigue because you're just going from like one call to the other, it's going to be routine and lifeless, right? So any way that you can, at your very best, laugh and not take it as seriously. In many ways, there's a lot more material. You got like a cat walking across the screen, or like laying on the screen, or like my son, he likes to take these giant snakes, like the toy snakes, and throw them at me when I'm on a Zoom call, and they terrify me, even though I know that they're fake. Things like that, where it's like, how can you not laugh at that and just kind of let it go and just kind of be a little bit kinder and take it easy, because it just turns into such a chore if you don't.
So what can stand-up comedians teach us about problem solving?
I think what I like to say is, in life, there's so many moments, right, where you have embarrassment, or, oh, I wish I didn't say that, or I wish I didn't wear that, whatever it was. And we tend to torture, we tend to self-torture. So we'll replay those moments of embarrassment or whatever it is over and over and over. We magnify it in our minds, and we just keep replaying it. And when we do something and you have these moments where something worked out, right? And it went really well and you had a great time like this. It's like, why not replay that and embrace it and really reflect on that? And I think that with comedians, those moments where they'll get up on stage and, they bomb, they're not dwelling on that. The best comedians, it's just it's just part of the process. It's built into their success. Failure is an inevitable part of their success. It's necessary for their growth. So if we can take more of that into our lives and understand that you're either going to learn from it and grow and get back on stage and do better the next time, or you're just going to sink and stay in that space and not really move forward. I think that's really the critical part. Embrace the positive, hold on to it, chase it, build it, and let go of those moments that you don't really want to replay, right? So why replay them?
It's almost like the stage is like a learning environment. I think the term for the learning environments where you just get immediate feedback as to whether something you did worked or not, I believe that's called a kind learning environment. If I'm mistaken, I apologize. And the stage is very much like that, right? Because you could tell a joke and it's either going to make people laugh or it's not going to make people laugh. And I think that draws parallels to the data science world, because learning how to program, learning how to code is most definitely one of those environments where you try something and it works, or it doesn't work. You'll get an error, bounce back. And it's important to take what you learned from that mess up, from that failure, to improve, rather than just getting stuck in, this joke didn't land, therefore I'm not funny. No one is ever going to laugh at my joke ever again.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Which is not true, right? Because that's a story that you're creating. And if you're around people who constantly remind you that that is not the case, it makes it so much easier to just not care.
What's up, artists? I would love to hear from you. Feel free to send me an email to theartistsofdatascience@gmail.com. Let me know what you love about the show. Let me know what you don't love about the show. And let me know what you would like to see in the future. I absolutely would love to hear from you. I've also got open office hours that I will be hosting, and you can register by going to bit.ly/ADSOH. I look forward to hearing from you all, and I look forward to seeing you in the office hours. Let's get back to the episode. I'd love to get into your leadership philosophy. I'd like to think that the data scientists who listen to this podcast, they're a special breed of data scientists. These are the ones that are going to become chief data scientists, chief analytics officers. So I'd love to kind of get them thinking about what it means to be a good leader. So what do you think makes a good leader?
Sure. So I had the honor and privilege of being part of the American Express Leadership Academy at the Arizona State University Lodestar Center for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Innovation. And out of that experience, I essentially was able to do a lot of great work with excellent leaders, and which we have a book club where we talk about leadership and we read all leadership books. And I'm launching a podcast called Leader Voices, which is funded by the American Express Leadership Academy. And so I'm living, eating, breathing leadership. I think it's a fascinating area to explore. And what I firmly believe is that, there's kind of this old school way of looking at leadership, which is more of kind of an authoritative, I demand respect type of philosophy, which is really just out the door. That's not working anymore. People aren't interested in being in kind of like a fear-based relationship. And I think that the best leaders and the most effective leaders, they truly make you want to be your best. So it's not about anything else. It's about inspiring people to want to do their best work simply because it's more of a value, right? It's a value, and they respect their leaders. So I feel like the best leaders will allow their teams and inspire their teams to be the best version of themselves, versus this kind of old school notion of micromanagement, or knowing where your staff is at all times and really dictating the way in which you want them to do their jobs. And I think with the pandemic, that's something that's evolved as well, where, there's a lot more flexibility and more of a focus on essentially the quality versus the quantity of a person's work.
And if somebody wanted to read up more about leadership, do you have any kind of like book recommendations that they can go pick up?
So one of my favorite leadership books, which some might say is not a leadership book at all, is The Happiness Advantage. And it's really about the way in which positive psychology plays a role in perpetuating greatness. And when you have negativity, it creates a cycle of malfunction in the workplace. This is another book that, I don't know if anyone would consider it a leadership book, but I read it every single year, and it teaches me a lot. It's Kafka, Metamorphosis. And it's for anyone who hasn't read it, it's a book about a guy who wakes up and he's like a giant cockroach. And it really explores the nature of our existence and working and what it means to be part of the world in a more meaningful way, I think.
Thank you very much. Those are very, very interesting recommendations for sure. I forgot what YouTube channel it was, but there's a YouTube channel talking about like the history of the phrase Kafka-esque. And I didn't know much about Kafka himself, but it was sad to see that he got posthumously famous. Like, he had written all this stuff, was so afraid to push it out into the world, or for whatever reason didn't push it out into the world. And, his friend found it and published it on his behalf. I guess, How would that relate to stand-up comedians, right? Like, do you think there might be people out there, and it might not even just be for stand-up comedy, it could just be for their own work. It could be somebody out there that wants to post their opinions on LinkedIn. Maybe they want to write a blog post, but they're scared to publish it. They're scared to go for it. Do you have any advice for somebody who might be feeling that?
Yeah, it's so fascinating. So Kafka instructed that gentleman to burn all of his works, and the guy didn't listen, and he published it. And it's timeless. It's absolutely timeless. Metamorphosis was published in 1915, and I read it every single year, and it's absolutely timeless in terms of its lessons. And I think that as human beings, especially artists, especially people who demand perfection, such as myself, it's debilitating. You don't want to do it unless it's perfect. And that stops you from doing it because nothing is perfect, right? So recognizing that sometimes progress is better than like not doing anything, right? So just breaking it down into those steps and saying, look, I'm going to do this. And if it works out, it works out. And if it doesn't, I did it. It's that not having that regret. And I think that's one of the reasons why comedians go for it, because they don't want to regret not doing it and not taking advantage of the fact that life is short. So it kind of goes back to this whole concept of really being cognizant of the fact that you're going to die. It is 100% inevitable. There's nothing more inevitable than your death. And so knowing that you don't have all the time in the world, and if there is something that you're passionate about, why not do it?
I love it. Absolutely love it. I was reading a book earlier today, Seneca on the Shortness of Life. I think you might really enjoy that book as well. It's
I'll make a note. Thank you.
Yeah, but it's written by a Stoic philosopher, Seneca. He's awesome. So going back to leadership and your philosophy on leadership, like I mentioned, the artists of data science, right? My people who are listening to my show, they are the artists of data science. They may not be leaders yet, but they are definitely well on their way to becoming chief data scientists, chief analytics officers. But where they are right now, they might not have that title. So do we have to be in like a official leadership role to be a good leader or to show leadership?
Yeah, absolutely not. So I think that this is, it's such an important and great question that you're asking right now. Essentially, leaders lead in all walks of life. They don't have to have those leadership titles. They don't have to be designated leaders where people know that they are the designated leader. The best leaders are leading, and people unconsciously many times will just turn to them and look to them for what's next. That's leadership in the truest form, in that it's just who you are and the way in which you walk into a room, the way in which you show up. So a good example of this would be really recognizing the fact that leadership isn't about you, right? It's about the way you make others feel and the way in which you allow others to bring their greatness to the table, to be the best version of themselves. So whenever you're in a place, and this connects back to laughter, it's like just bringing that authenticity, bringing that joy and that happiness and that non-judgment and accepting people and trying to see them for who they really are. That's leadership, because you're allowing people to feel comfortable and inspired, and they actually intrinsically in turn want to be the best version of themselves because of the way in which you see them. So any human being who can do that in any aspect of their life, whether it's getting a coffee at Starbucks or, leading a conference, whatever that is, that's true leadership, allowing others to be the best version of themselves.
And how can we start to do that? How can we start allowing people to be the best version of themselves? Let's say there's somebody that's listening that might be in an individual contributor role. What could they do to start kind of showing up as a leader, start cultivating these qualities for themselves?
So I think vulnerability is a big aspect of creating connection. So I think building relationships is fundamental because you're building trust. So anything that you can do in those interactions where you're being vulnerable and showing that you're willing to connect, you want to connect. And I think vulnerability is a great way of doing that. And that could be vulnerability in laughter, or it could be vulnerability in sharing something that will allow that other person to kind of say, okay, I don't need to have my guard up. This isn't something where all the walls have to be up. A great example of this is, like a lot of times we gather with other people. We get into these group gatherings and you're kind of just doing the motions, right? Let's say it's a conference. It's like, you just kind of do the motions of what you think that's supposed to be. But really getting out of that mindset of just kind of doing the motions, but really focusing on how can I truly do something that will make this person remember me? People will remember, there's a great quote, I know you've heard it a million times, people remember how you make them feel. And those are the things that you want to focus on when you're thinking about leadership. Because if you make them feel comfortable, they're going to be more comfortable, and everyone just wants to be comfortable with the people that they are forced to hang out with, no matter where they are, right? You surround yourself with people who you want to be comfortable with. So it seems so simple, doesn't it, when you say it like that?
I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, so you work with data scientists as well, and that we're quite knowledgeable individuals. I'd say definitely intelligent as well. And one of the things about being so knowledgeable, so intelligent, is that you always have to feel like you need to know the answer to everything. And I think a real easy way to start showing vulnerability is, if you don't know the answer to something, don't pretend like you know it and be like, yeah, oh, got it. Just acknowledge the fact that you don't know and just share that, be comfortable and be open with that. Is that an example of vulnerability?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an excellent example of vulnerability. The people who I work with, my research team in particular, they're brilliant. And when I first started in my role, I was extremely intimidated. You used a lot of adjectives to describe, and I was waiting for you to say, they're intimidating. Like, data scientists are intimidating in their brilliance, because if you're a data scientist, like, you are like up there, like you're extraordinary. And it's kind of like a rock star kind of role when you read about the positions and the companies and the sheer power of data in itself in this day and age. So I think maybe some advice for your listeners is, you guys are rock stars. Like, there's hundreds of millions of people who would kill to be a data scientist. And you don't need to know everything, and it's okay to kind of embrace your rock star-esque, because you're a data scientist. Like, that's freaking brilliant. Own it. Strut around with that. And if you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer, but you're still a freaking data scientist.
I love that. That's really, really making me blush underneath all this brownness. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that advice for the listeners. In your research, have you found that like leaders, do they have better sense of humor?
I think the best ones do. My president and CEO has a great sense of humor, and it always just is very, endearing. And I have so much respect for him for many, many reasons. But a lot of the greatest leaders that I talk to, it's not so much that they're like doing stand-up comedy or anything like that. It's not like structured, but it's just kind of taking it easy, not taking themselves so seriously and finding the humor and kind of being very human. And I think that's part of like the authenticity part of it, where it's like, like I'm just another human being. Like, yes, I might be in a position of power, but ultimately, I like to joke around. Like, I like to binge watch Netflix sometimes. You know what I mean? Like that kind of bringing the walls down and allowing yourself to just be human and laugh a little. But I do think that builds trust, and it is important because it makes people feel they're part of something bigger.
That brings me to this other research that you that are heavy into is authenticity. I'd love to get into that space. So can you help us understand what authenticity means? Because I feel like that's a term that just gets thrown a lot, almost like a buzzword nowadays. But what does that actually mean? Can you help us understand that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting notion, and I think there's a lot of different aspects to it. One area that I've always really been interested in exploring is the way in which your clothing impacts your authenticity or your ability to be you. So I did a lot of research many years ago on the ways in which your actual clothing impacts your body language and therefore impacts the way in which you're behaving. So we did a series of studies where our students would basically go into the mall at the same time every day, because they were trying to get research on the same salespeople. So they'd go in at the same time, and one day they'd wear, like a full professional suit, look very wealthy, etc. And then they just kind of charted the way in which it might have helped with their, the way in which it might have impacted their posture, the way in which they, may have stood up with a little bit more confidence, the way in which they communicated, eye contact, and also the way in which other people treated them, which in turn impacted the way in which they would behave. And then on alternating days, they'd wear like hoodies with Timberland boots. This was done in Connecticut, in New Britain, Connecticut, at Central Connecticut State University. And they noticed right away that they felt kind of paranoid. They were many times followed around the store, not greeted. So it's both, right? So the way you're dressing is going to change the way in which you're going to feel more comfortable. So obviously wearing things that make you feel more like you is going to make it easier for you to be more authentic. And it's also going to impact the way in which people see you and the way in which they treat you, which it all kind of ties together. So they're all pieces, right? So authenticity, it's not just like one version of you. Like you're going to have days where you're a greater version of yourself based on health, mood, whatever. And then you're going to have days where you're not at that same level of yourself. So knowing that it's okay to fluctuate, and it will fluctuate. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. And how do you handle that? And then what things can you control, such as, your attire, etc., that would help you be the most authentic version of yourself.
So why is it more important that we keep it real in the first place, and like now more than ever?
Well, I think for so many years, like we didn't have the beauty of the internet where we had all of these different places where we could fit in as ourselves. Before there's so much of this is how you are supposed to be if this is what you look like or if this is who you are. So and now it's like I could be, think of the weirdest categories of description for a person. And I'm sure I could find a group somewhere online that would wildly accept me as one of their own. So it's like we live in this beautiful day and age where we can really self-reflect and say, these are the things that make me happy. I really am into magic. I want to learn how to do like magic, like a magician. Like that is cool to me. And it takes self-reflection to recognize that that's something that I'm into and I want to, pursue that. So it's like, it makes it easier to live your life if you're doing things that you love, right? Because that's authenticity. So like my goal is no matter where I am or who I'm interacting with, I'm pretty much exactly the same. I don't have like these different variances. And yes, on my best days, I'm going to be better. And on my worst days, I'm not going to be as great, but I'm still going to be me. And I think back in the day, it was more like, okay, this is professional, Sadhna. And we don't talk about going to Vegas and having, 4 days of debauchery with, certain people because they're your professional people. It's like, I don't want any of that in my life. I want I want consistency and authenticity and to be embraced and accepted for who I am, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
So can we cultivate authenticity as a trait? Is that something that if we feel like we're always got our guards up, if we're not the same across all kind of situations, can we cultivate this authenticity? And if so, like how?
Yeah, I think self-reflection is critical. There's a lot of great tools. I do it's like the 6-minute journal, and it's a gratitude journal where it's like every morning I reflect on the things that bring me joy. And so when I'm experiencing those moments, I'll kind of be more present and embracing them in the moment, and I'll know, okay, this is going to go in my gratitude journal tomorrow. But I think self-reflection, right? So anything that you can do where you're constantly self-reflecting, like think about all, like, okay, so I'm 38. I just turned 38 about 3 weeks ago. And in my 38 years, there have been so many times where I've spent time with people who I don't enjoy spending time with. And it's like, that makes me inauthentic, right? Because I'm not myself. I'm not feeling great about it. And it sucks. So what do? You stop hanging out with people who don't make you happy, right? You stop hanging out with people who are not interested in your well-being, or they don't make you feel like the best version of yourself, or like you can be yourself, right? That's a big one. It's like, stop hanging out with people who don't make you feel like you're allowed to be yourself. Things like that. So self-reflection is definitely the key. Increasing the things that bring you joy and make you happy, and getting rid of all the rest.
I love it. That's super simple to do. Well, it's simple, but it's difficult at the same time. It takes work and it takes effort to really put in that self-reflection and really think about who you are.
Maybe do it in like a measurable way. So you can say, look, this year I'm going to focus on accelerating 2 things that are very important to me. One of the strategies that we use in the American Express Leadership Academy is creating a happy list. So you just make a list of all the things that really make you happy. And then based on that list, you multiply, or, in retrospect, you also reflect on the things that didn't make your list.
Can we use authenticity to help us combat imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to, again, in terms of the people you surround yourself with. I owe so much to my circle of friends. They're amazing. And I used to so I have imposter syndrome. Let me rewind a little. So I have imposter syndrome. I've had it my whole life. No matter what I do, what I've accomplished, I kind of feel like, sure, like that happened, but it wasn't that hard. It wasn't that big of a deal. I don't look at it as extraordinary. When you describe my bio, I feel like you're talking about a different person. Like I'm said, you know what I mean? Like I'm just this simple, but it sounds like this fancy person that is separate from me. So what's really helped me the most in my life in terms of alleviating the imposter syndrome is surrounding myself with people who are kind. It's like when you surround yourself with people who kind of diminish your accomplishments, it's a lot easier to have imposter syndrome because they're actually supporting that. And so I worked for a toxic leader in the past, and most of my peers in this organization were toxic. They weren't kind, and I really felt like an imposter. And now I work in an organization where it's like everyone's really kind, and there's a healthy organizational culture where that toxicity is not accepted. And I don't feel like an imposter as much, because I'm working in an organization where people support each other's wellness.
It's crazy how much of an effect that could have on you. And it spills it spills over into your personal life. Even though it just affects you at work. Like I was in the same type of toxic environment for several years, and I was working for, it's not good, but it impacts you really negatively.
Absolutely. You spend so much time at work, right? It's like your whole week is really kind of designed around your work, your whole life, your year, your vacations, depending on, what type of positions you're in. So it's like if you're working in a place where they're not making you feel, healthy, or like toxicity is accepted, I think that it can be really detrimental to your psyche, and it will increase your imposter syndrome because it's just inevitable.
Last formal question before we jump into a quick random round. It's 100 years in the future. It's 2120. What do you want to be remembered for?
2120. So one big thing for me is I'm very much passionate about education, especially in India. And I believe education is really the key to bridging the gender gap and really ensuring that our future generations are educated and really ready to handle on the challenges of the world. So I would want to be most remembered for my impact in the educational space in rural India. There's a lot of need in rural India, and I try to do the best that I can to really bring attention to the need and to increase, especially for female students, their educational opportunities.
That's wonderful. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much. So let's jump into a quick random round. First question, since you were huge into Shakespeare, I was having this conversation with my cousin a couple of days ago. She's a high school senior and she was reading, I think it was Hamlet that she was reading. And we're talking about why high schools don't have like a modern version or modern translation of Shakespeare that's devoid of all the thou, forth, art, shalt, chant, stuff like that. Do you think that should ever happen?
No. You're reading someone. Okay. So it would be inauthentic. Okay. So here's my 2 cents on this. So it would be inauthentic because there really is no real authentic way to read Shakespeare. It's always going to be filtered because someone's already putting him on a pedestal and saying, you have to read this. It's important because it's Shakespeare, right? So you'll never have a truly authentic experience of Shakespeare because it's filtered in your experience. But to take his language and change it, come on. You can't do that. Like, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was reading like there's a modern translation of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations that reads so much more cleanly and poetically as opposed to like an older translation that has all those thous and chant and forts and all those stuff. And I know I just thought it might be easier for high school students, but you're definitely more of an authority in this than I am.
It's kind of like a puzzle though. So identifying, and then some of the fun of it is like the linguistic history, right? The evolution of our language, and some of the words are just hilarious. Like, I just feel like it's almost like a puzzle that and like understanding the double meaning of some of the words that he uses, and how, you have like these words that mean something different in a slang sense to certain groups, your penny seaters, and then for like the aristocrats, the way in which those words would resonate with them, and the way in which, in many ways, Shakespeare was hilarious and he made fun of these people constantly through his brilliant language. I think that what I would say is when I teach Hamlet or when I teach any Shakespeare, we do it all. So we do the original text, and then we'll go through different versions because it's also interpretation. So it's like one version will really, really play up essentially the Oedipus complex. One version will really play up, the relationship between intelligence and madness in Hamlet. And so looking at all the different versions and then also understanding that each one of those is an interpretation of his text, of his language.
When do you think the first YouTube video to hit 1 trillion views will happen? And what do you think that video will be about?
Wow, that is such a good question. So I am a reader and I don't watch YouTube. And whenever people share videos with me, I find it very, I'm very impatient. I can't watch videos. If there's like something that I need to like learn and they only have like video instructions, like I won't even watch the video. So I would say that 1 trillion views, I hope it has closed captioning. I really do. Because I would want to read whatever it is that would have that many people interested. And I have no idea. I hope it's not. I hope it's of value. If it's going to cause that much, it's probably going to be like a cat doing something weird.
What year do you think that will happen?
Relatively sooner than later. I think that there's definitely, having an addiction to your phone and like constantly checking it is a real thing. And more people are really immersed in constantly consuming media. So I think it'll be sooner rather than later. And it's probably going to be the pessimistic part of me. I feel like it's probably going to be pretty sad.
Yeah. I think the current, as of just like last week, the most watched video on YouTube is Baby Shark.
Okay.
So I guess that says a lot about us. What are you currently reading?
So I I do this thing where every year I reread a handful of books that are like my favorite books. So it's a classic. It's Camus, and it's called The Stranger. It's a very like tiny book, and the flight here is like 45 minutes. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to get that out of the way because I like to read it every year again. So I just finished reading that. But the other two books that I read every year, it's a series by Patrick Rothfuss. The first book is called The Name of the Wind, and the second book is A Wise Man's Fear. Both, I mean, absolutely, 10 out of 10. Brilliant.
Yeah, definitely have to check those out. I'll add those to the show notes as well. Let's jump into the random question generator and see what we come up with here. All right. First question, what issue will you always speak your mind about?
I think literacy and education are critical. And anytime that people are not equipped or that's not encouraged, I think that's a huge issue, and it should always come first.
If you lost all of your possessions but one, what would you want it to be?
I would say my Kindle. Hopefully I'll still have internet access, but then I'd have an unlimited amount of books because I am a bookworm.
What's your earliest memory?
My earliest memory. Wow. This is getting deep. So when I was a very young kid, I ironed my hand. So I have like this giant scar on my hand because I ironed it. And I ended up going to the hospital. I think I was there for like 30 days, and they actually investigated my mom for like negligence. And like they thought she was like abusing me, which she wasn't. She just wasn't paying attention when I ironed my hand.
Wow.
So I remember that.
Pirates or ninjas?
Ninjas. All day. That's easy.
How can people connect with you, and where can they find you online?
So you can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can go to my website. It's sbokhiria.com. And then I have all of my contact information on there.
Dr. Bokhiria, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be on the show today. I really, really appreciate you taking time out of your weekend in Vegas to be on the show. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.